7A. I want to thank Adam for setting up the shop. This is the real shop, right? My father of blessed memory said that Torah is the best Torah. Torah is the best merchandise. So this is the real shop, right? It was a common expression. Many people that say Torah is the best Torah. I mean, many people who are working people, or business people, but they gave over that love for Torah by saying Torah is the best merchandise. And when people bring up talk like that, so then their children might want to be involved in Torah. But when people would say Torah, that Judaism is very difficult, or as the expression went, schwer zu sein a Yid, difficult to be a Jew. So those children, many of those children said, okay, I don't want it. If it's so difficult, what child says I want difficulties? That's what happens. So Moshe Feinstein said that we lost a lot of people, in the 30s, the 20s in America, because people would lose their jobs on Friday. So they didn't show to work on Shabbos. They would lose their job. And so, and maybe many times some people complained about it too much instead of saying, okay, yes, it's challenging, but it's a privilege that we're Jewish. But too much negativity about it, in a sense, perhaps by saying it's difficult to be a Jew. So we lost a lot of people in the next generation. So bless you, that did not want to keep it the program, so to speak. Okay. So we are on Zayin Amud Aleph. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Morning. So we were discussing, by the way, I just recommend that people should maybe reach out to Mr. Haber. And I understand he's back in the office, but he's not staying in Manhattan.
No, he's not. I don't know. He's not back in the office. He's in Brooklyn with his son, and I see him every Shabbat. And there's no one else on the line, right? So he doesn't look.
It's not. It's better there. I mean, it's better. We'll talk more privately about it.
Right,
but
right,
he needs to get well. He has to get back to himself. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, but his health is a little alien. We need to pray for him to do better.
Right. Okay. Should have a full shalema.
Amen.
And today's class, we're going to dedicate, of course, to Mr. Safdie's memory, and to an Eliyahu ben Rivka and Iju bat Esther, the neshama should have an Aliyah. Okay, so we were talking about the walls of the Sukkah, and we said that Rabbah said a chidush. The Rabbah said that the same way the two walls and a tefach work for Sukkah, so too that it's a kosher Sukkah if you have two walls and the third wall has a tefach. Right? And we learned a lot of details about that third wall, exactly the tefach. So too, when it comes to Shabbat, if you had on the Shabbat of Sukkah, since this is called a home for Sukkot, this Sukkah would also be called a home regarding carrying on Shabbat. And you would be able to carry within this Sukkah on Shabbat, even though on an ordinary Shabbat, it does not meet the requirements of a Reshut HaYachid, does not meet the requirements of a private domain, but on Shabbat of Sukkah, since it's considered a wall regarding the laws of Sukkah, it's considered a third wall. Like we said, good morning, Mr. Batesh, good morning, Ariel. We said a Sukkah requires 3 walls. We want to welcome Mr. Batesh, who's joined us. Stephen has joined us. A Sukkah requires 3 walls. That's the requirement of Sukkah. And not only do a Sukkah requires 3 walls, but there's another idea that there's a special halacha that says you don't even need 3 full walls. You need 2 walls that are adjacent to each other, and a third wall could even be a small amount of a tefach. And there's many details about that third wall. But now the Gemara said, Rabbah says the same way that it's called the third wall is considered a wall. It meets the requirement of a wall for Sukkah. So on Shabbat of Sukkot, it also would be considered a wall regarding carrying on Shabbat. To carry in an area on Shabbat, you need 3 walls to be considered on a Torah level. If you have something that's 3 walls and the 4th wall is open, so rabbinically, you have to put up some sort of string, some sort of something to the people should know you're entering into a private property. That's what you need at Surat HaPesach. There's some things that you need to do on Shabbat on a rabbinic level in order to make it allowed to carry within that area on Shabbat. But on a Torah level, it's a private domain on a Torah level that once you have three walls. So we say that since it's a wall for Sukkah, so it's considered a wall for Shabbat of Sukkot. That is the Chidush. Now, so the Gemara questioned this Chidush. The Gemara questioned, do we say that the fact that something is a wall for Sukkah, that means we're going to consider it a wall for Shabbat also? That's what the Gemara says. We'll read the Gemara inside. You have the Gemara Zayin Amud Aleph, 7a. We'll go back 782 on the bottom right corner. Shtayim kilchatan. 2 walls that are proper, and the 3rd wall even a tefach. Omar Rabbah v'chel Shabbat. You have it 7a3 or 782 on the bottom. 782 on the bottom right corner. Omar Rabbah v'chel Shabbat. It even comes in at a nice, hard, sophisticated Gemara. Shabbat. Regarding Shabbat, if it's considered a wall for Sukkah, that 3rd wall, so for Shabbat, it also will be considered a 3rd wall when on the Shabbat of Sukkah, specifically. Now, why? Since it's considered a wall for Sukkah, so it's considered the 3rd wall for Sukkah, so too have a dofen in the Shabbat. It's also considered the 3rd wall regarding Shabbat. So now that's the chidush of Rabbah. Eiteve Abaye. Abaye questions and challenges Rabbah's chidush. Is everybody with me? Umi amina migud. Do we say that the fact that it works for Sukkah, that is counted as a 3rd wall, this small wall is considered as a proper wall? Do we say that it works for Shabbat? Is that true? We have a Hatanya. We learned in a Breita. Dofen Sukkah. If you want to send to the group that we're on. Dofen Sukkah. Thank you. The wall of a Sukkah is Dofen Shabbat. Sukkah, if it's considered a wall for Shabbat, it's considered a wall for Sukkah. And we explained yesterday, what does that mean? We said if you stand poles next to each other, this pole next to this pole next to this pole, and you have a certain amount of poles next to each other, and there are spaces between the poles, as long as the spaces are minimal, not more than, let's say, 9 inches, we say a space not more than 9 inches or so is considered filled in. It's not considered a space. You don't 9 inches is a lot, right? So that's true. It's still considered a wall. If you have a wall made out of you have a pole. As long as you're within 9 inches, each pole is within 9 inches apart. We look at it halachically, legally, as if that space is full. So what do you say? As well, whatever it's for structure. If you're making a wall, you want to make a private. Let's say you're going to public property, and you want to make a private area in the public property. This would be in general. In general, even for right. That's right. We said we want that wall to be within 2 and 3 tefachim. But here we're saying, if you want to make a, there's a law by Shabbat. You need 3 walls to be private domain. Again, we said private domain on a Torah level on Shabbat, because if it's open, if you're open on the 4th side, people might not realize you're going into a private domain. Therefore, you have to show them by putting a string across. You have to know this is a private domain. Okay, but on a Torah level, 3 walls create a private domain. So whatever law, if you say this is called a wall for Shabbat, if you say you can make a wall like this, even though there's spaces in between, that's also, you can make that wall that works. The wall that works for Shabbat is the wall that works regarding Sukkah. If we could say that that's the wall for Shabbat, right? We say it's a wall for Shabbat. So if you want to make a Sukkah, right? Stephen's making a Sukkah, and he's making Sukkah, and he's using poles as the wall. He's making poles as wall. Technically, that's a good wall. You could make a wall out of poles for a Sukkah, even though Max, there's spaces between each pole. That's that. So if it's considered a wall for Shabbat, that the way the law considers something a wall for Shabbat, you consider it a wall for Sukkah. Okay, that's the Gemara says, as long as long as you don't have between one pole and another pole 3 tvachim, you don't have that space. Okay. Now the Gemara says, but then the Braita continues. V'yetera Shabbat al Sukkah, but Shabbat has some stringency over Sukkah. Meaning, we just gave a leniency. We just said that you can make this wall out of poles, even though there are spaces in between the poles. It works for Shabbat. It works for Sukkah. But there's a stringency about Shabbat that we're more strict about Shabbat than at Sukkah. What is the stringency that we're more strict on Shabbat than Sukkah? So the Gemara says, V'yetera Shabbat al Sukkah. Good morning. The Shabbat is more. Morning, Michael. Shabbat has a stringency more than Sukkah. In what way? Shabbat ain't teret ela omeid meruba la paruz. On Shabbat, if you have, let's say, cuts in the wall. You have walls on Shabbat. You have a structure, and you have the structure, but there are cuts in the walls. And the cuts in the walls are not cuts that look like an entranceway into the wall. It's just a round cut, a hole in the wall. If the cuts in the wall are more than the wall itself, if you would add up all the cuts and the holes in the walls, and we're talking about, these are cuts that are more than 3 tvachim. It's not like we said less than 3 tefach cut. It's like it's together. It's nothing. But if these cuts are more than 3 tvachim, and you add up all the cuts in the wall, and the cuts, the holes in the wall are more than what's with the actual wall, that's like the wall is not there. It's like the wall is breached. It's like it's a broken wall. It's not a wall. That's the law by Shabbat. Now we're talking about, now we're going back to a regular wall. No poles in the wall, a regular, nice, fully cemented wall, and then you cut holes in the wall, and you made nice breaches in the wall. So we say for Shabbat, in order for it to be considered that these are walls that are here, you have to add up the spaces and add up what's remaining. And if there's more remaining, more standing than down, than cut, right, Michael? That's considered a wall. Now, you don't have that stringency by Sukkah. By Sukkah, even if the total amount of space is cut, is open more than that's filled up, it still works by Sukkah. Now, what does that mean? Now let's listen to the case by Sukkah. By Sukkah, we know if you have one wall like this, one wall like this, that's 2 walls, and then you say, and the third wall is 1 tefach. So that means the third area, the spaces of the third wall are 95% open. The whole 4th wall, and there's no 4th wall there. Plus, if there's some holes in the other 2 walls, it would be, at the end of the day, we would say that it's still good by Sukkah. By Sukkah, even though there's more open space than closed space, it still works by Sukkah. Sukkah, we have that law. So the Gemara says, my love, probably, when we say, my love, the Gemara says, Yitera Shabbat the Sukkah Asukah. Most probably, the Gemara is thinking that the Shabbat of Sukkah is more stringent when we say, when the Breita says, the question is, what does the Breita mean that Shabbat is more strict than Sukkah? So the Gemara is thinking it's the Shabbat of Sukkah versus the Sukkah itself. The Gemara is thinking on the Shabbat of Sukkot, we're going to say that if the structure has more opening than closed, meaning if it's a wall, if it's a sukkah of 2 walls and a third wall only a tefach, and then you'll have some space in the middle in the other walls, you're going to tell me that on Shabbat it doesn't work, but on Sukkah, but it's going to work for Sukkah. You're going to tell me that it's not a private domain on the Shabbat of Sukkah. When you make this type of Sukkah, it's not going to count as a private domain because but we know on a general Shabbat, in order to be considered a proper structure, you need to have more wall than empty space. But we know that's a given on a regular Shabbat. We also know on Sukkah, on the Sukkot, you don't need that. We know, we said that Shabbat is different than Sukkah. That's given on a regular Shabbat of the year. A regular Shabbat of the year, you can't have more open space in this structure. If you want to create a private domain, the closing of the walls have to have more closing of the walls than opening. That's on a regular Shabbat. On Sukkah, you don't need to have more closing than opening. You can have these 2 adjacent walls, and you have a certain amount of hole in the wall, and you have, and each wall has a hole, right? But let's say I have a wall here, and what? That you need a tefah. It has to be a tefah, the third wall.
But that size here, it's called this.
The wall has. You can't have any hole in that. No. Again, you have that. That has to be a tefah. But then it's not a tefah. No hole. It has to be a tefah. Now the question would. I'm saying your question again. It's like, you're saying a hole in that tefah wall. Meaning, if the way you presented the wall, it could be if you have a hole in the wall going this way, going up, might not be a problem. But you can't have. The width has to be in full tefah. It could be you might be able to have talking on the height. But you must have the wall itself has to be the width, has to be the tefah, right?
Here's
Right. Let's say this
my other wall goes this way and down. Here's the wall that's coming this way.
Well, right. There has to be. If you cut off something over here,
No, I'm not cutting.
it's a hole right here.
Right here.
If that might be a problem, because
More than 50% solid.
the question is the question. Yeah, but again, if you made a hole here, then you might not have a wall. It's not might not be considered a wall of a tefah. It's a good question. I don't mean it might not be a wall, but you only cut it this way and you didn't cut it this way. It's a good question, Mark. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's considered. If you would have the hole that way. Okay, if you have the hole on this side of that will be not in the middle the way you presented it. Then you don't have a width of a tefah. Okay, morning. No, he always has good questions. Mark always has good questions. So the Gemara says, my love, probably when you're telling me that Shabbat is more strict than Sukkah, the Gemara is thinking that's not only on a regular Shabbat. Morning, Simon. Even on the Shabbat of Sukkah. Meaning, a regular Shabbat, we know, Shabbat is more strict than Sukkah, right, Max? On a regular Shabbat, if you want to make something a private area on Shabbat, you have to have more wall than empty space. The 3-wall structure has to have more. On Sukkah, you don't need to have more structure than empty space. You can have the 2 walls and the tefach, and some more space in the 2 walls, and you're technically good for Sukkah. Now, so when we say Shabbat is more strict than Sukkah, does the Breita mean just on an ordinary Shabbat versus ordinary Sukkah, or does it even mean on the Shabbat of Sukkah? I know. I know. What, does it even mean the Shabbat of Sukkah? Today, make believe today will be Shabbat, and make believe today will be Sukkah. It's also the holiday of Sukkah, and it's also Shabbat. And I create my Sukkah. I made my 2 walls, 2 full walls, right, Michael? And the third wall, I made a tefach. We know it works for Sukkah. We know it's a kosher Sukkah. But is it considered a private domain for Shabbat also, that I could carry 4 amot in such an area? So the Gemara. This is Rabba's chiddush. The Gemara. Abaye is challenging him. Abaye is saying, it seems from the Braita, when the Braita says Shabbat is more strict than Sukkah regarding the space being open or closed, most probably he's talking about the Shabbat of Sukkah. It's Sukkah, it's Shabbat, it's Sukkah, and even on that Shabbat, good morning, Kevin, it's considered a private, for Shabbat, it's not a private domain. It doesn't get credit as a wall. We want to know what's the issue here. This tefach wall is considered, you got credit for a third wall for Sukkah. A Sukkah needs 3 walls. And we say if you have a wall of tefach, the third wall of tefach, it works. It's considered a third wall for Sukkah. Shabbat also needs, on a Torah level at least, a third wall. Now, if you consider this structure a third wall for Sukkah, do we also consider it a third wall for Shabbat? So Abaye is saying, it sounds like from the Braita, that the Braita says that Shabbat is more strict than Sukkah, and it's not considered a third wall. When even on the Shabbat of Sukkah, it's Shabbat, it's Sukkot, and it's Shabbat. It's considered a third wall for Sukkah. It's kosher for a Sukkah. You could sit and eat in this, if you put the food in there before Shabbat, or you could sit and eat in there, but you cannot carry in that because it's still considered a public domain because it doesn't have a proper third wall regarding Shabbat. Because it says we're more strict on Shabbat than on Sukkah. So the Abaye was thinking, means even the Shabbat of Sukkah is more strict than the laws of Sukkah. That means regarding Shabbat, you're not allowed to carry, but regarding Sukkah, it's a kosher Sukkah. It's not a wall for Shabbat, but it's a wall for what? It's not a third wall for Shabbat, but it's a third wall for Sukkah. That's Abaye's challenge to Rabbah. Is that clear? It's a little complicated. Mike, right. So the Gemara says, "My love, Yitera Shabbat is Sukkah. Sukkah, doesn't it mean that the Shabbat of Sukkah is more strict than Sukkah? D'lo amina migui. We don't say that it's a wall for Sukkah. It's a wall for Shabbat. The Gemara says, "Lo, that's not what the Braita means." Now the Gemara defends Rabbah's position. When it says Shabbat is more strict than Sukkah, it's not talking about the Shabbat of Sukkah. It's talking about an ordinary Shabbat when it's not Sukkah. It's more strict than Sukkah. An ordinary Shabbat when it's not Sukkah, that tefach wall doesn't count as a third wall. But a Sukkah, a tefach wall counts as a tefach wall. But if it will be Shabbat of Sukkah, the Braita would agree that since it's considered a third wall for Sukkah, it would be considered a third wall for Shabbat. That was the Gemara's defense. You can't use this Braita as a knockout, as a question on Rabbah, because we don't see that we could explain the Braita that it's not going against Rabbah's position. Because the Braita is not talking about Shabbat of Sukkah, when it's Sukkot and it's Shabbat. Because there, if it's Sukkah and it's Shabbat, if those two come together, since you call the tefach wall a wall for Sukkah, it would be also considered a wall for Shabbat. When we're contrasting Shabbat to Sukkah, we're not talking about Shabbat of Sukkot. Max, is that clear? We're talking about an ordinary Shabbat and an ordinary Sukkah. Sukkah. That's but we're not talking about the Shabbat of Sukkah. Now the Gemara says, if that's the case, now we're going to a new point. The Gemara says, if that's the case, litli nami, we are on the bottom of the 7A3. If that's the case, litli nami, the Braita should say, Yetera Sukkah de Alma, a Sukkah de Shabbat. We should say that a regular holiday of Sukkah, and when there's the Chalamot, let's say we'll talk about Yom Tov of Sukkah, that doesn't come out on or let's say Chalamoid, when it's not Shabbat. And let's say, what'd you say? What'd you say, Mark? We have, listen to me, Yetera Sukkah de Alma, a Sukkah de Shabbat. A regular day, good morning. Yes, Baruch Hashem. The Leviim, when Moshe Rabbeinu says, Mila Hashem Elai, who showed up? The Leviim. They came forward. They say they know which team to be on. So the Gemara says, listening to me, Yetera Sukkah de Alma, a Sukkah de Shabbat. There's a stringency for Sukkah on a regular day of Sukkah is more strict than a Shabbat of Sukkah. Why? What does it mean? What's the case that a Sukkah on a regular day of Sukkah is more strict than a Shabbat of Sukkah? So listen to this. The Ila Sukkah de Alma. On a regular day of Sukkot that's not Shabbat, Boi Tefach Sochek. We require the third wall has to be, like Mark showed us, a tefach. The third wall has a requirement to be a minimum of a tefach, and the Gemara said a tefach sochit, a smiley tefach. That means a wide tefach, a little more than an actual tefach. That's what the third wall has to be. However, we have a law by Shabbat. What the ilu sukkah de Shabbat. Now, on Shabbat, if you have a wall, two parallel walls facing each other, they're facing each other, parallel walls. And then you make a third wall on the side of these two walls. You make a third wall, and it's 10 tefachim high, and it's not a tefach wide. Any size, small, a few inches, an inch wide, any amount wide. We say on a Torah level, that's considered a private domain for Shabbat. Two walls, and the third wall that's standing. It seems like it's next to one of these. It seems like it's next to one of it's next to one of these two walls, right? Let's say you have wall number 1, wall number 2, and here's wall number 3. I made wall number 3. It went this way, right? It went this way, and this third wall number 3. Good morning. This wall number 3 that went this way, even though it's only what? It's not even a tefach. Why? It's considered what? Good. Let's say it has to be close to any of those two walls, but it doesn't have to be a tefach wide. It doesn't require the width of a tefach. On a Torah level, it becomes a private domain. Meaning, you need 3 walls to be considered a wall for a Torah. In order to be considered a private domain for Shabbat, on a Torah level, you need 3 walls. So we're going to consider it's less than a tefach wide. It's the height of 10 tefachim. Let's say it's right next to, adjacent to that wall. And we look at this wall as if it's a third wall, and the whole opening is like an entranceway. It's like an entranceway in. And therefore, we consider that a third wall on a Torah level. On a rabbinic level, it doesn't. You need more than that. But on a Torah level, that's considered a private property. Okay, you got that? 2 walls parallel, and a third wall that's in the middle. And that third wall, it's not even a tefach wide, not even a 3 inches wide. That's considered a third wall. Yes. On the Torah level, it sounds like not. So this sukkah is more strict. Exactly. So by sukkah, we said that third wall has to be a tefach wide. And then we have all other possibilities. Maybe it has to be with where you place that third wall. But it has to be a tefach wide. It has to be minimum 3 or so inches wide to be considered a kosher wall for sukkah. But it does not need for Shabbat. It's even more lenient on Shabbat. Shabbat, we say what? That you don't even need the third wall to be a tefach. So now the Gemara says, and by the way, you should know, even by Sukkah, that we say, okay, we'll go with that for now, because we said by Sukkah, not everybody agrees that even a tefach wall will even be enough by Sukkah, right? We said if the walls are parallel, some say tefach wall won't even work there. The only time a tefach wall will work by Sukkah is when they're adjacent to each other. There is an opinion that says even when they're parallel, it works. So Sukkah is much stricter. In that case, we have a stringency on Sukkah over we have a stringency over Shabbat. Shabbat, it can be easier to be a private domain for Shabbat than for Sukkah. For now, but we should say let us say that a sukkah of a regular sukkah, day of sukkah, is more strict than sukkah of Shabbat. How? The ilu sukkah de alma. We're comparing the. We're comparing we're on the Deraita level, but just on Deraita one, the Rabbanan level might have more requirements, but we're focusing on what makes something a private domain on a Torah level. On Sukkah also, and it's right, Sukkah also. Now, listening nami yetera Sukkah de Alma, Sukkah de Shabbat. The Ila Sukkah de Alma, the Sukkah comes out during the weekdays. The wall of the sukkah has to be at least a size of a tefach wide, the third wall. The ilu sukkah de Shabbat, but if sukkah comes out on Shabbat, lo boi tefach sochek. You should not the third wall doesn't have to be a tefach. Why doesn't it have to be a tefach? V'sagi belechi koshu. It could be a small little post. Why? The atu de amrat, because you said. If you made schach, if you put schach on, there was an alleyway, and the alleyway was open on both sides, but there were two walls, and you put schach on top of the alleyway, and you had, but the third wall, you had a little board, a little post by the third. It wasn't even a tefach. We say that's good. You said it works. You said if it's kosher, it is kosher. Why is it kosher? Because you said that since it works for Shabbat, on the Shabbat of Sukkah, you said that the Shabbat of Sukkah, if I have two walls here and the third wall is not a tefach, since it is considered a third wall for Shabbat, it's a third wall for Sukkah. Meaning, generally, it doesn't meet the requirement. Sukkah, the third wall needs a tefach. But since for Shabbat, we say we're lenient for Shabbat, it's called a private domain for Shabbat. If you have two walls and the third thing right next to it is the third post. If the third wall is even not even a tefach, but you say it's called private domain for Shabbat, so you also say it works for Sukkah. So why don't we list that? And why does that work? Because of migui. Since it's a third wall for Shabbat, it's a third wall for what? For Sukkah. So why don't, if you're telling me that migui works, that you apply the principle that applies there will apply here. If it's considered a wall for Shabbat, we consider a wall for Sukkah. So why don't we list it? Meaning the same way you said that if it's a wall for Sukkah, it's considered a wall for Shabbat. So you should also tell me if it's a wall for Shabbat, it's a wall for Sukkah. That's what the Gemara is saying. So the Gemara says, I don't need to tell you that. Why? Because I need to tell you, if I need to tell you that, like Jaime yesterday and Mark yesterday were talking about, there's a novelty to tell me that if something is a wall for Sukkah, that we're going to count it as a wall for Shabbat. And Shabbat is generally much more stricter. That's what Rabbah needs to teach us. But if something is considered a wall for Shabbat, surely it's considered a wall for Sukkah. Sukkah is much more lenient than Shabbat. So I don't need to tell you that if it works for Shabbat, it works for Sukkah. If it's a wall for Shabbat, it's a wall for Sukkah. Of course, if you could consider something a wall for Shabbat, even though it doesn't have all the proper dimensions of a wall, but you look at that third wall, that lechi, that little post, that you consider that even though it's not a tefach wide, it works. It's considered private domain for Shabbat on a Torah level. Certainly, it will work for what? For Sukkah. So I don't need to tell you that. I need to only tell you what's a novelty, what's a chidush, something I would not know on my own. But that's what the Gemara shoots back. We don't hold what? Okay, I mean, we don't see we'll see, you have to look in the halacha, because the Gemara, it does say, it has a letter of the Rambam Shulchan Aruch on it. We're gonna take out the halacha on Monday in honor of Mark, because it sounds like the halacha would work. On when? On Shabbat of Sukkah. No, Sukkah, general day of Sukkah will work. The only question is, we're only gonna say that it would seem to me only it's considered on the Shabbat. That Shabbat is considered, but on a regular day of Sukkah it won't work. It will not work on a regular day of Sukkah, because regular day of Sukkah we said you need a tefah, but only the Shabbat of Sukkah, because since today you're considering a private domain, today you're considering this a private domain for Shabbat. Today that we consider private domain for Sukkah, but not on an ordinary day of Sukkah. Right. But it's not such a big. The novelty is that we consider it. But once you already told me the bigger novelty, you told me that if it's a wall for Sukkah, it's a wall for Shabbat. Automatically, I will know if it's a wall for Shabbat, it's a wall for Sukkah. But it's still a novelty that it could work on the Shabbat of Sukkah. That even though the third wall is not a tefah, still it's counted as a proper wall, because since you consider this a private domain for Shabbat. The Gemara says, look, the Gemara says, I don't need to teach me that leniency. If we say we go from something which is lenient, which is something like Sukkah, and we apply the principle that since it's a wall for Sukkah, we apply that as a wall for something which is more strict for Shabbat. So mechamirta lakilta lo kol shekain. Certainly, if it's a wall for Shabbat, that wall that counts as a wall for Shabbat of Sukkah will definitely work as a wall for the Sukkah that is a kosher Sukkah. If it's a private domain for Shabbat, on the Shabbat of Sukkah, you call this a private domain. So therefore, we're going to say that it's also kosher for a Sukkah. The Gemara continues. Gufo, Amar Rava. Now we're turning the page. Mabruk. We're turning the page. Mazel tov. Here's what Mark, look at this. If you made schach, you put schach on an alleyway, it has two parallel walls, and it has the third wall, has a little post, has a board that's less than a tefach wide. Kishera, it would be kosher on the Shabbat, on Shabbat of Sukkah. Shabbat of Sukkah, since this is called a wall for Sukkah, for Shabbat, it will also be called a wall for Sukkah. And we're going to continue. Yom Tov on the Shabbat of Yom Tov. Not Shabbat, if it's Yom Tov of Sukkah, not okay. But if it's Yom Tov of Sukkah on Shabbat, since you're calling this a private domain for Shabbat, you're going to also call it a private domain. It's also called the kosher Sukkah. Okay, to be continued, everybody. And we'll see everybody on Monday.
Shalom, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi.
Everybody.
Shalom, guys.
Everybody. And we welcome Stephen has come to the class, and we hope there'll be many, many, many more. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Welcome. You want to send this? You have a mitzvah to send a sukkah on Shabbat.
No, I'm saying Shabbat. It's not in Sukkot.
Right.
So what's relevant to Sukkah on Shabbat? It's not Sukkot.
What's wrong with sukkah on Shabbat? Right. Right. If it's Shabbat, that's not sukkah. Then the question is, if you make such a structure,
Right.
can you, but you don't need the schach there. But you need the wall
To make it a.
to make it a private domain. So
Oh,
if
to make it
it's, so if
private
it's,
domain.
so if it's on a regular Shabbat, let's say this Shabbat, it's not Sukkah. If I want to go ahead and make a private domain, at least on a Torah level, if I have put up two walls facing each other, and a third wall, I make a third post
Right.
that's 10 tefachim high, and it's not a tefach wide. That's considered a third wall. And on a Torah level, I would be able to carry within this area. So I created a private domain on a Torah level.
Okay.
Now, but if I do that on Sukkah, that yeah, I'm pretty thing. But I'm going up. Yeah. So, but on Sukkah, it wouldn't. But if today would be Sukkot, I would not. It's not. It's not a kosher Sukkah. It's not a kosher Sukkah. That's not kosher Sukkah. But yet, if today.